Welcome back to another episode of Tony's Takes. The court is back in session once again. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, Anthony_Rivardo on Twitter. Make sure to give me a follow. And today we have a pretty interesting topic talking about the deep passing game, right? The part of the game that Jason Garrett probably didn't emphasize enough last season, but we're going to talk about why that might have been the case and why this upcoming season that's bound to change. And of course, before we get into it, just make sure that you subscribe if you're new here, ring a bell so you don't miss a video. Of course, leave a like if you do enjoy this video, and check out the members section. Tony's Takes is always open to the members first. It's available to them exclusively for a day or two, and then the rest of you get access to it. And of course, the members also have a lot of influence on what topics I actually discuss on this solo show that I have here. So without wasting too much time, let's get right into it and talk about Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Daniel Jones, and a little bit of Matthew Stafford, just so we can contextualize some of the things with Kenny Golladay. So, of course, the topic of this episode is going to be how Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney are going to probably form this upcoming season an elite deep threat duo, okay? So the Giants offense last year really lacked a vertical passing game. We all know that. We all complain about that relentlessly. How Jason Garrett just didn't let Daniel Jones throw the ball downfield enough. Well, was it the fact that Jason Garrett didn't let him throw the ball downfield? Was it the fact that Daniel Jones wasn't comfortable enough throwing the ball downfield? Combination of both? Absolutely. But let's take a look at Daniel Jones in this scenario. How comfortable do you feel with the offensive line that the Giants put in front of him, throwing the ball downfield, waiting in the pocket, waiting for the plays to develop, especially when your wide receivers can't get open downfield? The Giants had one legitimate deep threat wide receiver on their team last year, and it was Darius Slayton, and he was hobbled for the majority of the season, dealing with foot injuries. I think he had something wrong with his shoulder at some point. Darius Slayton wasn't 100% last season, and those of you in the comments section, make sure to remind me of that every time we discuss him on the podcast. But Darius Slayton was struggling with injuries. Sterling Shepard, of course, also struggling with injuries and also just not a deep threat. Very great intermediate to short route runner. And then, of course, Golden Tate, also not much of a deep threat. Can go downfield and make a contested catch every now and then, but really a guy you want in the intermediate to middle range of the field. Not a guy you want to be pushing downfield. Evan Engram was someone that I think that the Giants should have had going down more field way more often than he was, but unfortunately, in the Giants' offensive scheme in 2020, the tight end was asked to do a lot of underneath route running and a lot of underneath reliable contested catching. Also not Evan Engram's game, but we've talked about that in a previous episode of Tony's Takes, and we'll probably continue to talk about that going down the road as we enter this next season. But now I want to talk about these new wide receivers that the Giants added. Of course, the big splash signing that the Giants made this offseason, Kenny freaking Golladay, the top wide receiver on the market, arguably the top free agent on the market. The Giants brought him in for, I believe, $18 million a year, spent a whole lot of money to get Daniel Jones his number one wide receiver. But this was something that the Giants absolutely had to do because they need a deep threat on their roster. They needed one now, but they also had another huge addition into the wide receiver core this offseason when they drafted Kadarius Toney with the 20th overall pick, first round of the 2021 NFL Draft. So not only did they bring in that big body ex-receiver, 6'4" Kenny Golladay, elite deep threat to their roster, they also brought in Kadarius Toney, slot wide receiver, very fast, very quick, does a lot of great things after the catch, which we'll get into in a little bit, but he also is a pretty great deep threat as well. Have some stats to back that up once we get really into the meat and potatoes of this video. But Kadarius Toney and Kenny Golladay both brought in this offseason, and just look at last year's wide receiver core compared to this upcoming year's wide receiver core. Last year, you're talking about Darius Slayton being your only deep threat. You're talking about a core that had Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard, and Golden Tate. This year, you're talking about Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Kadarius Toney. Even John Ross is a pretty solid deep threat when you throw that name out there. And you could even say Dante Pettis as the backup who was there for the end of this past season. He's another backup deep on this roster. That's a pretty decent deep threat. So the Giants added a whole lot to their vertical passing attack. And of course, I think Evan Engram, you're going to see him go vertical a whole lot more because now you have Kyle Rudolph to go ahead and sit down in that intermediate range, make those contested catches that Evan Engram struggled to do this past season. So that's going to open things up for Evan Engram to go downfield and make more vertical passing plays or receiving plays in that instance. So let's get into some statistics, though, as to why I think that this duo can actually be an elite deep threat duo. First of all, Kenny Golladay in his own right is an elite deep threat in the NFL. Top 3 deep threat in the entire league from the wide receiver position, in my opinion. Okay, so you're talking about the guy who ranked 4th among NFL wide receivers in deep receiving yards over the past 3 years. Now keep in mind, he was 9 yards behind 3rd place in those past 3 years, and he only played in 5 games in 2020. And in one of those games, he was hobbled and was, he really couldn't even get through. He was barely throwing the ball. So you take a look at that. I mean, that's just incredible that he's still, despite barely playing this past season, ranks 4th among NFL wide receivers in deep receiving yards. In 2019, that breakout season where Kenny Golladay had his 2nd consecutive 1,000-yard receiving season, led the NFL in receiving touchdowns with 11 total. He had 628 yards on deep passes, which ranked 2nd in the league that season. And then in 2018, or since 2018, Kenny Golladay has the 2nd highest contested catch rate in the NFL. He's been an absolute monster. 50-50 balls, he goes up there and gets it. And that's one of the reasons he is such an elite deep threat, because he is so big and he's so strong and powerful. You throw it up into 50-50 balls, he's going to go up there, probably do a little babytron, that's what they like to call him in Detroit, on the cornerback, go up there, moss him, make a big play downfield. That's Kenny Golladay. But then you're also talking about Kadarius Toney, who's got a whole different brand of football. He's not your big outside wide receiver threat, your big go up there and make a contested catch guy. In fact, I rarely saw Kadarius Toney make any contested catches on his film when I watched him pre-draft and post-draft. But what I did see was a whole lot of speed and a guy who actually was able to separate from coverages thanks to his speed a lot of the times, and also a guy who was really good underneath, making plays, catching the ball, making plays after the catch. But let's talk about him, not after the catch, not underneath, but let's talk about him going downfield. 99.6 PFF grade with a perfect 158.3 passer rating when targeted on passes 20 plus yards downfield. So that's just elite efficiency. Perfect passer rating. How much better can you get than that when going downfield? 10.7% of Toney's targets in college were on passes 20 plus yards downfield. 10% might not be the largest number, especially when you compare that to a guy like Kadarius Toney, but just to contextualize it, so he's going downfield at a pretty decent rate, 10% we'll call it, but he's also not going downfield at an extreme rate. But when he is, perfect grade, perfect passer rating, very, very efficient when going downfield. And I think that's key for Daniel Jones as you look at him with his deep passing numbers this past season. Now, he only threw the ball downfield 43 times, 20-plus yard attempts 43 times in 2020. So that's not a whole lot at all. That was actually a pretty low number. That's 3.1 deep passes per game. Very low number there. Only 9.6% of his attempts. Again, a low number. But he did have a 95.6 PFF passer grade when going downfield, and I think all of us know Next Gen Stats made him the number one, or their statistics had him earn the number one deep passer rating in the entire NFL this past season. They said he was the best deep ball thrower, and you turn on the film, it's true. He was so efficient throwing the ball downfield. So this relates to Kadarius Toney in the way where, maybe he doesn't throw downfield that much, but when he does, he's very efficient and very good at it, and I think that's exactly what you're talking about with Kadarius Toney. He might not be going downfield and getting targeted downfield all that much, but when he is, I expect it to be a big play, and I expect it to be very efficient. And then this also relates to Daniel Jones and Kenny Golladay, because you're talking about Daniel Jones only throwing the ball downfield 43 times last season, right? 3.1 per game. He didn't have a deep threat to enjoy throwing to. Darius Slayton was his deep threat, but again, he was hobbled, and he really wasn't that great of a deep threat like Kenny Golladay is. I mean, Kenny Golladay, like I said, one of the best deep threats in the NFL. So I expect that number to go up quite a bit from 43 attempts. That number should go up a whole lot this upcoming season when you're talking about having Kenny Golladay injected into the Giants' passing attack. When you take a look at Daniel Jones' 20-plus yard attempts in 2019, mind you, he played 12 games that season, and he threw 4.5 attempts per game, 54 total, which made up 11.8% of his attempts. So that's much higher than the 9.6% and the 3.1 per game, 4.5 and 11.8%. That's much, much better. And I think, just the Giants' offense was better that year anyway. I think that probably having Saquon Barkley on the field helped him out pretty well there as well. And also Darius Slayton was healthy that year and was going downfield and making a lot of plays in the deep passing game, so that probably helped him as well. So when you're talking about what was the problem with the Giants' deep passing attack last year, yes, I do think that Jason Garrett made some mistakes in terms of the playbook, in terms of the scheme, and not going vertical enough, not having enough vertical concepts or shot plays into the playbook. But I also think Daniel Jones wasn't comfortable with the personnel that he had this past season, and also wasn't comfortable with the offensive line in front of him. But this upcoming year, now that we've got more deep passing weapons on this roster, I think you're going to see him throw the ball downfield a whole lot more, and you're going to see a much larger emphasis from Jason Garrett and the rest of the offensive coaching staff on throwing the ball downfield. But now to contextualize some of this stuff with Kenny Golladay, I want to take a look at some of his stats this past season before he got injured, and I also want to take a look at Matthew Stafford's stats these past 2 years with Kenny Golladay, right? Because Kenny Galladay's breakout season was in 2019. So Stafford's average depth of target in 2019 was 11.4 yards. Compare that to Daniel Jones's 8.4 yards in 2019. That's an extra 3 yards per passing attempt. Now that's pretty insane if you think about it, that he's throwing the ball 3 yards further downfield every single play. Stafford, of course, being one of the more aggressive quarterbacks in the NFL, but also there is a big difference between the years that he had Kenny Golladay in the lineup versus the years that he didn't. 2020, his average depth of target was only 9.4 yards. So it went down over 2 whole yards, or actually 2 yards exactly, when Kenny Golladay was a big focal point of the offense and when Kenny Golladay wasn't. Daniel Jones only had an average depth of target of 8 yards in 2020. Again, just really emphasizing the fact that the Giants offense was not throwing the ball downfield this past season. But Matthew Stafford, again, without Kenny Golladay, didn't go downfield that much either. In 2019, he threw the ball downfield 56 times in 8 games. Daniel Jones threw it 54 times downfield that same season in only 12 games. That's 7 attempts downfield per game for Matthew Stafford. 19.2% of his attempts were on 20-plus yard passes. That's kind of insane, and that is because, as we said, Kenny Golladay had 628 yards on deep passes, which ranked second in the league that year. That is absolutely correlated. Matthew Stafford was throwing the ball downfield frequently because Kenny Golladay is a deep receiving monster. And even the backup quarterback knew that. That's why Kenny Golladay had all those deep receiving yards, because they just had to throw the ball deep to Kenny Golladay to stay in games because he's so damn good at it. And when you're playing from behind like Detroit was most of that season, you got to start airing the ball out. And they were doing that with Kenny Golladay, and it was very efficient. In 2020, Matthew Stafford had 67 deep attempts, which is down to 4.2 attempts per game. So something happened there where he got a lot more conservative this past year. Only 12.7% of his attempts were downfield compared to the 19.2% the previous season. Well, here's what happened. Kenny Galladay's absence completely changed Detroit's offense. There was no real vertical threat on the field once Kenny Golladay went down with that hip injury. And, Detroit has arguably the worst wide receiver core in the NFL right now. And it wasn't that great this past season either. After Kenny Golladay was injured, it was Marvin Jones as the leading receiver. And he's really not a huge deep threat at this stage of his career. Kenny Golladay entering the Giants offense will absolutely open it up and create a lot more deep passing opportunities for Daniel Jones in this offense. You look at Matthew Stafford, weeks 3 through 7. Those are the weeks where Kenny Golladay was in the lineup and he was fully healthy, or even maybe not fully healthy. He missed the first 2 weeks of the season with an injury, played weeks 3 through 7, was injured in week 8. He did play, but he was injured. So in those games, 3 through 7, Stafford threw 17 deep attempts, which was 13.2% of his passes. All the other games, he only threw 50 attempts, which was only 12% of his passes, so it did go down. Kenny Golladay accounted for 6 targets, 4 receptions, and 142 yards on 20-plus yard attempts in weeks 3 through 7, which was 35% of Stafford's deep targets and 21% of Kenny Galladay's total targets. And those 142 receiving yards going 20-plus yards downfield made up for 42% of Kenny Galladay's total deep yards, or total yards on the season. 42% of them came deep. Pretty impressive there, and just shows you how the majority of his game is made up on going vertical, and he is a true vertical weapon that the Giants are going to have to utilize vertically as often as possible. I mean, the Giants offense is going to probably look night and day different now that Kenny Golladay is on lineup, and I also think that Kadarius Toney is going to affect that a ton as well, because you're talking about him. He's going to open things up deep for Kenny Golladay because Kadarius Toney forced a missed tackle rate on 35% of his touches since 2018 in college, forced 32 missed tackles on 80 catches the past 2 seasons in college. This is the ultimate after-the-catch monster in the intermediate passing game, which is absolutely going to open things up for more one-on-one opportunities going deep for Kenny Golladay. And of course, when Darius Slayton's on the field as well, he's a legitimate deep threat. So Kenny Golladay is going to open things up for Slayton, and Slayton is going to open things up for Kenny Golladay. But when you're talking about Kenny Golladay going deep, and you're also talking about Kadarius Toney going deep, you're talking about a potentially elite duo right there with two of the most efficient deep receiving targets in their classes. Those are two deep receivers who are just very, very efficient on those 20-plus yard passes. So I think that this duo right here, maybe not in year one is going to be all around elite, but I do think going deep they're going to be elite in year one. But as Kadarius Toney really starts to develop and refine his game, I think year one he's going to be great as a deep threat, just using that speed. And he's also going to be great after the catch, manufactured yak plays, all that stuff, screen passes, jet sweeps, whatever. I think that, you look at the long-term outlook of this Giants offense and you look at the future of this team and this receiving core, this could be an elite unit in 2 years tops. I mean, I really think this is going to be one of the best wide receiving cores in the NFL in just a few short seasons, especially as Darius Slayton continues to develop. We just talked about Kadarius Toney refining his game, and of course Kenny Golladay continuing to be one of the best deep receivers in the entire league, and also just being one of the best receivers in the NFL, period, right? Kenny Golladay is a phenomenal player. So I think that was a really interesting breakdown, a lot of interesting stats there, especially looking at Daniel Jones versus Matthew Stafford, how often they throw the ball downfield, and how Matthew Stafford's tendency to throw the ball downfield really changed once Kenny Golladay was no longer in the lineup. Really didn't throw the ball downfield that much once he lost that deep threat. And I think you look at the Giants offense and you say they didn't have that deep threat and they didn't throw the ball downfield that much. So maybe now that they do have that deep threat, they're going to throw the ball downfield a whole lot more. And not only do they have one elite deep threat, they have a second guy come into the lineup, this rookie Kadarius Toney, who could be another elite deep threat. So that duo is going to play off of each other. Toney's going to open things up for Golladay. Galladay's going to open things up for Toney. And you're going to see this offense. This should be a well-oiled machine this upcoming season. As long as Daniel Jones can hold it together and as long as the offensive line can hold it together, this should be a really good offense this upcoming season for the New York Giants, and it gives Giants fans a whole lot to be excited for. That's why I love doing these Tony's Takes episode, and I want to hear your guys' feedbacks because I love just diving deep into these stats. I pull up these really obscure analytics and data like this, on these deep receiving attempts for these Giants players and all of these examples that I bring up. Very obscure stats, very detailed statistics that give you a greater idea of this offense or whatever the topic is and contextualizes it. I love doing that. I love really just diving into statistics and analytics and data. So I'm curious to know what you guys think, how you guys think I'm doing with that, if you're excited for every Tony's Takes episode. But at the end of the day, guys, I'm very grateful for all of your views, all of the love and support that you guys have given me as I begin this solo show. We're not even 10 episodes in yet, but we're doing a really good job, I think, and I'm excited for once the regular season starts or even the preseason starts, just ready to watch some football and break that down and not do any of the speculation stuff, but really take things and break them down and throw the advanced stats at you guys that way. I'm so excited for that, and I can't wait. So make sure you stay tuned to Tony's Takes throughout this season and ongoing past that, looking even further ahead, the draft, free agency, all of that. You can always count on me to break things down in a very analytical way, bring you all that data that you're craving. So very excited to do that, and make sure you let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Is this duo going to be elite? Let me know. And of course, have a good one. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, ring the bell so you don't miss a video, and check out the member section. We do a lot of great stuff over there to give the members some exclusive and elite content and extra perks as well, and the Discord and everything else. Check out the Discord if you haven't joined that already. Go ahead and do that. But anyway, I will catch you on the next episode of Tony's Takes, and let's go Giants. Court is adjourned. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.